What happens when a legendary grandmaster confronts a strong chess engine and plays in pure gambit style, sacrificing pawns, embracing dynamic play and constantly pressing forward? In the game we examine today, it leads to a fantastic checkmate in 5 moves, which unfortunately remained invisible to the spectators, but you will have a chance to find it, as I'll challenge you to do so in the critical position. So let's dive into another game from the fascinating match between the former World Championship contender David Bronstein and one of the strongest chess engines of that time, Deep Thought. Bronstein starts with e4, the engine plays the Sicilian defense, and as Bronstein's main goal in this match was to demonstrate what imaginative chess looks like, as in the previous game we looked at, he plays the Sicilian wing gambit, b4. The idea is to deflect the black pawn from c5, and that's exactly what happens. The engine accepts the gambit, and now that the black pawn has disappeared from c5 and it doesn't control the d4 square, white will get a chance to play d4 and occupy the center with both of his pawns. But as in the previous game we looked at, instead of the immediate d4, Bronstein plays a3 first, which is another idea of the wing gambit. White is ready to capture on b4, getting back his sacrificed pawn, and if to prevent this, black captures himself, which is perfectly playable, white will recapture either with the bishop or the knight, and for a pawn white would get compensation. He is better developed. As you see, black hasn't developed a single piece, while the white knight is quite active. It can invade either b5 or c4 later in the game. The rook, without making a single move, can be considered a developed piece, as the a file is open and the rook is putting pressure on this file, and the dark squared bishop has a nice b2 square, from which it will put pressure on the long diagonal. So, for the pawn, white definitely gets some initiative. For this reason, instead of capturing on a3, the engine plays d5. It wants to seize the initiative itself. Now, white doesn't have time to capture on b4 because a much more valuable e4 pawn is under attack. So, Bronstein captures on d5, and after queen takes d5, again white doesn't have time to capture on b4 because black is threatening queen e5 check and winning the rook. That's why Bronstein develops the knight, taking the e5 square under control, and renews the threat of a takes b. In the previous game we looked at, the engine played e5, defending the b4 pawn and threatening to push the pawn to e4, harassing the knight, after which the knight wouldn't have active squares to move. But in today's game, instead of e5, the engine plays bishop g4. Pinning the knight, and it seems that black is ready to capture on f3 and damage white's pawn structure. And there isn't much white can do about it. If he makes a natural looking move bishop e2, black would still capture, and it turns out that white cannot capture with the bishop anyways, because of queen e5 check, and again black is winning material. So in this case, after bishop e2 and bishop takes f3, white would be forced to capture with a pawn anyways. For this reason, there isn't much sense in playing bishop e2. So, Bronstein instead captures on b4. This pawn is very important. It plays an important role. It controls the c3 square, preventing white from developing the knight. So, Bronstein eliminates this pawn, and now he's ready to develop the knight with a tempo. So, black could have captured on f3 now, but in this case, after queen takes f3, it turns out that black cannot give a check. At first sight, again, black is winning the rook, but after king d1 and queen takes a1, black is temporarily up a rook, but after queen takes b7, it turns out that white's threats are much more serious. He's threatening checkmate in 1. The rook is under attack and there is no way to defend it. After the rook falls, the knight will also be under attack. Bishop b5 check is coming, so the black king is in trouble while the white king is absolutely safe. For this reason, after possible bishop takes f3 and queen takes f3, instead of queen e5 check, the best move for black would be queen takes f3, and it's true, white's pawn structure is damaged. However, white has a slight advantage because he has the advantage of 2 bishops in the open position. Besides that, black is behind in development. He hasn't developed a single piece, and white has different attacking ideas. He can play b5, restricting the black knight, preventing black from developing the knight on the active square. He has the idea of f4, bishop g2, attacking the weak b7 pawn, and it isn't clear how black is going to defend it. And he can develop the second bishop, again on the long diagonal, putting pressure on black's king side. So white would definitely have a slight advantage in this endgame. For this reason, so it seems that the engine didn't want to transition into a slightly worse endgame. So instead of bishop takes f3, the engine plays queen e4 check. And only after bishop e2, it captures on f3. White is forced to capture with a pawn, so the engine damaged white's pawn structure and captures on b4, winning a pawn. But for the pawn, white has compensation. He is better developed. As you see, black hasn't developed a single piece. The only developed piece is the queen, but it isn't a good idea to develop the queen early in the opening, because she turns into a target of attack. And by attacking her, you can develop your pieces with tempo. That's exactly what happens in this game. So the natural move would be knight c3, by which white creates two threats, knight b5 and knight c7 with a fork, and the second threat would be rook b1, attacking the queen, and after she retreats the b7 pawn falls. But instead of knight c3, Bronstein plays knight a3, which creates the same two threats, knight b5 and rook b1. Besides that, from a3 the knight might also jump on c4. So, as knight b5 and rook b1 is threatened, the engine plays queen a5, parrying both threats, moving the queen away from the b file and pinning the knight. Now, knight b5, of course, is impossible, as the rook on a1 would fall. But Bronstein plays bishop b2, developing the bishop, defending the rook, and that means the knight is unpinned. So, white has renewed the threat of knight b5, which would come with a tempo. The queen would be under attack, and after she retreats, let's say to b6, white would play bishop e5, attacking the c7 square for the second time. And there will be no way black can prevent the invasion of the knight on c7 in this case. For this reason, to prevent this, the engine plays knight c6, taking the e5 square under control. Now, white could have played knight b5 with a tempo, but after the queen retreats, white cannot play bishop e5 anymore to attack the c7 square for the second time, as the c6 knight controls this square. For this reason, instead of natural-looking knight b5, Bronstein plays c4. The idea is to bring the queen into play. So, by playing c4, Bronstein has opened the queen's diagonal and he is ready to play queen b3 with a tempo, attacking the weak b7 pawn. Besides that, the c-pawn controls the d5 square, and after the black queen moves away from a5 and the d-pawn is unpinned, white is going to push the pawn forward to d4, then to d5, occupying the center with a tempo, attacking and kicking out the knight from the active c6 square. So this is the second idea behind the c4 advance. And as this x-ray is quite unpleasant, the engine moves the queen away from the a file, queen g5. Another idea of queen g5 is to prevent white from castling, and also the queen is eyeing the weak g2 square. Bronstein develops the queen with a tempo, attacking the b7 pawn, and the engine castles queenside, defending the pawn and taking under control the important d4 square. Both the knight and the rook controls it. And we have reached our first critical position. What should white do next? You can pause the video and try to find how Bronstein increased the pressure on the enemy position. So it seemed that black had the total control over the d4 square and prevented the advance of the white pawn, but Bronstein still plays it, d4, threatening to push the pawn forward to d5. And it turns out that the pawn is actually untouchable. If black captures with the knight, then white simply exchanges, and after rook takes d4, he plays knight b5, attacking both the rook and the a7 pawn. And after the rook retreats, white would capture on a7, the queen side would be demolished, and the black king would turn into a target of a terrible attack. The same would be the case if black captures on d4 with the rook. In this case, white doesn't capture the rook, because after knight takes d4, black would get a great centralized knight as a compensation for the exchange, and the knight would occupy the d4 square with a tempo, attacking the queen. So instead of bishop takes d4, white again would play knight b5, again attacking both the rook and the a7 pawn. For this reason, the strongest move after d4 would have been, as the d5 advance is coming, would have been e6. And black controls this crucial square, and the position would have remained more or less equal. But instead of e6, the engine plays queen g2, invading this square with a tempo, attacking the rook. And we have reached the second critical position. What should white do now? His rook is under attack. You can pause the video and try to find the strongest move. So, probably the engine expected the natural-looking rook f1. And indeed, in this case, white's position loses its dynamism. And black would have played e6, taking the d5 square under control and opening the bishop's diagonal. And for this reason, white cannot actually play d5. That would be a mistake, because after e takes d, c takes d, instead of moving the knight, black can play bishop b4 check. And now if the king moves, then the d-pawn is pinned, and black can simply play knight e7, attacking it one more time, followed by knight takes d5. And if instead of king d1, white plays bishop c3, then black simply exchanges. White must capture with the queen, she isn't defending the pawn anymore, and black captures the pawn. Black is winning. After queen g2, rook f1 doesn't work. But there is a much stronger move than rook f1. Black's kingside isn't developed, so white can exploit that by sacrificing the rook. He can start a deadly attack by playing knight b5, activating the knight, attacking a7, letting black capture the rook. Black is up a rook, but after bishop f1 it turns out that the king side isn't developed, the black queen is out of play, the king is in trouble, white is threatening to capture on a7, another threat is d5, and black is helpless against all these threats. For example, if black captures on h2, which looks like the most natural move in order to bring the queen back into play so that she can try to take part in the defense of the black king, but white can simply play d5, attacking the knight, and if the knight retreats, then a7 falls, white is threatening deadly knight d6 check, after which the queen's file would open, b7 would fall, and the black king would get checkmated, and there isn't much black can do about it. Let's say if he plays rook d7 to defend the b7 pawn, then rook a8 would checkmate in one. But Bronstein writes in his annotations that he didn't have time to calculate all these complications after knight b5, as it was a rapid match, so he simply castled queenside, which is much better than rook f1, of course, because by playing long castle, Bronstein has defended his rook, and he has moved his king away from the center. Now black cannot play e6 anymore, which worked in the previous variation if white made a passive move rook f1. Because now after e6, black doesn't have bishop b4 check anymore, and white can play d5, attacking the knight. And what can black do? The only thing he can do is to move the knight away, after which his king would be, of course, helpless, a7 would be weak, and by playing queen e3, let's say, or knight b5, white will start a deadly attack. But still, black had a strong move after white castled long. Instead of e6, he should have played e5. And after d5, we can see the idea behind the e5 advance. The pawn controls the important central d4 square, and the knight might invade it with a tempo, attacking the queen and the bishop. And thanks to this great centralized knight, black can hold his position. The position would remain more or less equal. And if white captures the knight, black would even get an advantage. After e takes d, black gets a strong pawn on d4, which restricts white. Of course, the white rook cannot capture it, as the h1 rook would fall. White can play knight b5, which looks like the most natural move, attacking both pawns. It seems that white is winning a pawn, but by playing bishop c5, black can defend both pawns. White has no attack. Black's queenside is defended. White doesn't have sufficient attacking resources. The d4 pawn is very strong. f2 is weak. So, besides that, black is up a pawn, so black is much better. So, the strongest move after Bronstein castled queenside would have been e5, but instead the engine captures on f2. Of course, it was a dubious decision because black is behind in development and he had no time to capture pawns. But the engine has its logic. He captured the pawn with a tempo. The bishop on e2 is unguarded, so black is ready to capture it. But instead of saving the bishop, Bronstein plays dynamically. He pushes the pawn forward, of course, attacking the knight. Of course, if black captures the bishop, white captures the knight with terrible threats. The d-file opens, b7 is under attack, white is winning, of course. So, instead of capturing the bishop, the engine moves the knight to a5. Now both the queen and the bishop are under attack. And of course white could have played queen c2, defending the bishop, but Bronstein writes that he didn't want to defend this bad bishop, which is restricted by its own pawns and which doesn't take part in the attack on the black king. So he decided to exchange this bishop for the knight, which is one of the main defenders of the black king. So he plays queen b5, attacking the knight. Now it would be better for black to bring the queen to the defense of the king, but instead the engine captures on e2. Not right away. First it gives a check on e3, and only after the king moves to b1 it captures the bishop. And Bronstein captures the knight, attacking a7. That's why a6, saving the pawn. Bronstein brings the second rook into play with a tempo, rook e1, and the queen moves to f2. And c5, vacating the c4 square for the knight. White is going to bring the knight into the attack. Knight f6 follows. Bronstein brings the bishop into the attack, bishop e5, threatening checkmate in 1. That's why knight takes d5, defending this square. Of course, white could have made a prosaic move, rook takes d5, removing the defender of the c7 square. Black has no time to capture the rook on account of checkmate in 1, so the best move black has would be queen takes e1 check, and only after queen takes e1, as white isn't threatening checkmate anymore, black can capture the rook, and of course white is winning because he has a big material advantage and his attack continues. But instead of this simple continuation, Bronstein found a fantastic idea. He plays knight c4, bringing the knight into the attack and creating a threat of a spectacular checkmate in 5 moves. And it turns out that there is no satisfactory defense against this checkmate. So let's see if you can find this fantastic checkmate. Let's say if black makes a random move, let's say if he captures on f3, what would you do? How would you checkmate the black king in 5 moves? You can pause the video and try to find it. I will just give you a small tip. This checkmate is absolutely fantastic and it involves spectacular sacrifices. So, of course, again, white has a prosaic move, rook takes d5, but it doesn't lead to checkmate in 5 moves, because black will simply give a check from b3. So the first move is queen c7 check, the queen sacrifice. The idea is to deflect the white knight from d5. Black has no choice. He must capture the queen, and now the d-file is open. The second move, now we can see the idea behind knight c4. The knight invades the b6 square with a check, forcing the black king to move to b8. Now the king doesn't defend the rook anymore. So the third move, rook takes d8 check. The only move is king a7. What next? White must checkmate in 2 moves. Of course, again, he has a simple move, bishop takes c7, which is winning, but it doesn't lead to the immediate checkmate next move, because again, black can play queen b3 check. And the knight defends the a8 square, so the rook cannot invade. And if white gives a check from c8, then the black king has 2 squares to move. So I just told you that the knight defends the a8 square, but white still plays rook a8 check, the fourth move, sacrificing the rook. Black has no choice. He must capture with the knight, and now we can see the idea of this rook sacrifice. The knight is occupying the a8 square. After the knight has left the c7 square, the bishop's diagonal is open, so the b8 square is unavailable for the black king too. And now that the king cannot move to any of these squares, knight c8 checkmate. So this fantastic checkmate is threatened in this position, and there is nothing, almost nothing black can do. The best defense against this terrible threat is to give up the queen, and that's exactly what the engine does. Queen takes e1, pinning the rook. Now this combination with queen c7 check, followed by knight b6 check, and rook takes d8 doesn't work because rook takes d8 would be illegal. The rook is pinned. But of course Bronstein simply captures the queen and gets a big material advantage. And after a few moves in this position, the engine resigned, as after possible f takes e and c6, his king gets checkmated in a few moves. For example, like this, white is threatening rook b1 check, followed by checkmate in 1. So in this position, the engine resigned. And now I recommend watching other games from this fascinating match. Or, if you have already seen them, you can watch a game in which Bronstein makes a magical move to checkmate a human this time. But first, I'd be grateful if you like this video and subscribe, as it's really helpful for the channel growth.